The Galactic Union was on the brink of destruction. For centuries, it had stood as a symbol of peace and unity among the stars, bringing together hundreds of civilizations, each contributing its strength to maintain order in the galaxy. But now, none of it mattered. The Exelthar Dominion had shattered their defenses, crushed their fleets, and burned entire worlds to the ground. The Union's greatest warriors had fallen, their strongest fortresses reduced to dust, and their most advanced weapons had failed to stop the relentless march of the enemy. Desperation had settled over the remaining council members, their voices filled with panic as they argued over their last hopeless options. But in the end, there was only one choice left, a desperate, reckless gamble. They had to seek help from an unknown, untested species. A species no one had ever considered worthy of war. A species that had been ignored by the great powers of the galaxy. Humanity. The decision was met with disbelief and outrage. The idea of trusting an undeveloped, primitive race with the fate of the galaxy seemed like madness. The humans had no interstellar empire, no grand fleets, no legendary warriors known across the stars. They were a young species, barely stepping into the vastness of space, and yet their planet, Earth, had survived countless internal conflicts, wars, and disasters. Some in the council argued that humanity's resilience, their unpredictable nature, and their ability to adapt made them a perfect last resort. Others scoffed at the idea, calling it suicide. But there was no time for debate. The Exelthar were closing in, and with each passing moment, more planets were falling to their merciless conquest. The Union had no choice. With a heavy heart, the Council sent a diplomatic vessel to Earth, carrying a single message, a plea for help. When the ship arrived in orbit, the humans reacted just as unpredictably as the Union had feared. At first, there was chaos. Governments scrambled to understand the sudden arrival of an alien craft, their militaries prepared for a possible threat, and their people were gripped by both awe and fear. But soon, communication was established, and the truth was revealed. The ambassadors of the Union stood before Earth's leaders, explaining the horrors of the war, the unstoppable force of the Exelthar, and the billions of innocent lives at stake. They spoke of the desperate need for warriors, of the hope that humans could fight in ways that no other species could. But as they spoke, they noticed something strange, something unsettling. The humans were not afraid. They did not recoil in fear or hesitate in doubt. Instead, they listened carefully, their eyes filled not with terror. And then, to the Union's utter shock, some of them smiled. The ambassadors did not understand. This was not the reaction they had expected. Every other species that had faced the Exelthar had trembled at the mere thought of war, had begged for mercy, or had surrendered before the fight had even begun. But these humans? They leaned forward, asking questions, discussing strategies, analyzing the enemy with a level of focus that sent chills through the Union envoys. It was as if they were not hearing about an apocalyptic war, but rather a challenge. A test of survival. A game they intended to win. The human generals did not speak of retreat, nor did they ask about terms of surrender. Instead, they laughed a quiet, knowing laugh that made the Union ambassadors feel as if they had just unleashed something far more dangerous than they could comprehend. One of the humans, a decorated officer, finally broke the silence. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of excitement. "You're telling me there's a galactic war going on. The enemy is bigger, stronger, and has never been defeated. And you're asking us for help?" He leaned back, exchanging glances with the others before nodding. "Sounds like fun." The Union did not know whether to feel relieved or terrified. They had come to Earth expecting warriors or cowards. They had found neither. Instead, they had found something far more unpredictable. Something far more dangerous. They had found humans. When the first human warships arrived at the front lines, the Galactic Union still struggled to believe they had made the right decision. Every species in the Union had trained their armies for centuries, following strict codes of warfare, relying on predictable strategies and disciplined formations. But the humans? They were different. They did not move in perfect lines like the soldiers of the other races. They did not rely on overwhelming firepower or brute force. Instead, they brought chaos. As the first battle against the Exelthar Dominion began, the Union's commanders watched in disbelief as human forces ignored conventional tactics entirely. Instead of forming defensive walls or engaging in slow strategic advances, they struck fast, hit hard, and disappeared before the enemy could react. They used the terrain in ways no other species ever had, setting traps in the most unexpected places, luring enemy troops into narrow alleys, abandoned structures, and ruined buildings where ambushes awaited. It was a style of warfare the Exelthar had never encountered before, and for the first time, their unstoppable momentum was broken. The Exelthar, a species known for their brutal efficiency, had never known fear. They crushed civilizations without hesitation, overwhelming their enemies through sheer force. But against the humans, they found themselves confused. Their enemies did not behave as expected. They did not stand still and fight honorably. Instead, they laughed in the face of destruction, making jokes in the middle of battle, as if war was just another problem to solve. They modified broken weapons mid-fight, turning scraps into deadly tools. They communicated in rapid, unpredictable ways, using coded signals, hand gestures, and even strange phrases that meant nothing to the Union but carried deadly intent among their own. They did not fear death, nor did they fight like soldiers who expected to lose. Instead, they fought like hunters, like predators who had found their prey. The most unsettling moment for the Union came when a human squad, completely surrounded by Exelthar warriors, refused to surrender. Every other species in the galaxy, when faced with impossible odds, would either retreat or accept defeat. But the humans? They smiled. "Looks like we're outnumbered," one of them had said. Poor guys. And then, without warning, they turned their weapons on the environment itself. Explosions tore through the battlefield, collapsing buildings and sending fire through enemy lines. The humans didn't just fight, they changed the battlefield itself, turning disadvantage into an opportunity, making the Exelthar feel like they were the ones being hunted. As more battles were fought, the Union began to realize a terrifying truth: the humans were enjoying this. They were not like the other species that had been crushed under the weight of the Exelthar invasion. They did not see this war as a tragedy. They saw it as a puzzle to be solved, a game to be won. And worst of all, for the first time in their history, the Exelthar knew fear. The Dominion soldiers, once thought to be unshakable, began hesitating before engagements. They became paranoid, expecting attacks from places no sane enemy would strike from. They questioned their own formations, afraid that every piece of cover was a trap. The humans had infected them with something far worse than any weapon doubt. The Galactic Union, watching this unfold, could hardly believe what they were seeing. They had searched for heroes, for disciplined warriors who would stand against the Exelthar with honor. But what they had found was something else entirely. They had found a species that refused to play by the rules. A species that fought with cunning, madness, and sheer audacity. A species that did not fear an enemy's strength, but rather laughed at its weaknesses. The humans were not heroes. They were something far more dangerous. They were unpredictable. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The war had changed. The unstoppable Exelthar Dominion, a force that had crushed empires and burned entire civilizations to ash, now found itself in an unfamiliar position on the defensive. It was unthinkable. For centuries, their conquests had followed the same pattern: invade, destroy resistance, and establish dominance. But against humanity, their strategies collapsed like brittle glass. No matter how many soldiers they deployed, how many ships they sent, they did not fight like other species. They did not break under pressure or retreat when outnumbered. Instead, they smiled, whispered jokes to each other, and walked into battles with the kind of reckless confidence that terrified even the most hardened Exelthar warlords. At first, the Dominion's commanders believed it was an act, a mask of arrogance that would soon crack. But the truth was far more disturbing. The humans enjoyed the war. It was as if they had been waiting for something like this, a challenge worth their time. The Exelthar, creatures of strict military doctrine, could not comprehend it. They fought with numbers, brute strength, and calculated efficiency. But the humans? They fought with chaos. Their strategies made no sense. They should have lost countless battles, and yet they continued winning. They charged into impossible situations, only to emerge. The Dominion's troops began to feel something alien to them, paranoia. No longer did they march into battle with certainty. Now, they second-guessed every move, checking for hidden traps where none existed, flinching at shadows, and expecting ambushes even when there were none. The humans had infected them with an idea so powerful that it spread through the Dominion ranks like a virus. The enemy is insane, and insanity cannot be predicted. The XL had always relied on order, discipline, and structure. But how could you fight an enemy that did not follow any rules? One of the most terrifying moments for the Dominion came when a human strike team infiltrated an enemy battleship not to destroy it, but to steal it. No species in the galaxy had ever attempted such a thing. It was madness. A suicide mission. And yet, the humans boarded the vessel, fought their way through its corridors, and took control. When the Dominion's commanders tried to contact the ship, all they heard was laughter and a human voice saying, "Thanks for the ride." Moments later, the battleship turned its weapons against its former fleet, tearing through their warships before escaping into hyperspace. It was impossible. It was insane. And yet, it was human. The Dominion's warlords, once arrogant and unchallenged, now held emergency meetings, their voices filled with uncertainty. Their grand invasion had turned into a nightmare. The humans had no mercy, no fear, and no predictable patterns. What was once a simple conquest had become a hunting ground, and for the first time in their history, the XLR realized something horrifying: they were the prey. The Galactic Union, who had once doubted humanity's worth, now watched in stunned silence. They had expected warriors, but they had found something far more terrifying. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were having fun. The stars above burned with the wreckage of fallen ships. The final battle had begun. The XL Dominion, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was now cornered. Their empire, built on blood and conquest, was collapsing under the weight of something they had never encountered before: humanity's defiance. The war, which had once seemed like an inevitable victory, had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Now, the last remnants of the Dominion had gathered on their homeworld, their once proud fleet reduced to battered warships, their once invincible armies forced into defensive lines. They had expected to crush the galaxy with sheer force, but instead, they now stood waiting for the inevitable: the arrival of the humans. And then, they came. Human warships, patched together with scavenged parts, bearing the scars of 100 battles, descended like predators. There was no grand speech, no warning, only the silent acknowledgement that this would be the final strike. The XL braced for a conventional attack, one last desperate clash where they could at least die with honor. But that was not how humans fought. Instead of engaging in an orderly battle, they attacked from every angle, breaking through defenses with unpredictable maneuvers. Their ground forces dropped from the sky, landing in the heart of enemy strongholds, fighting with the kind of reckless brutality that defied all logic. They did not care about casualties, about the odds, about tradition. They cared only about one thing: finishing the fight. The XL warriors, once unshaken in the face of war, now trembled. Their leaders screamed commands, trying to maintain order, but order had no place here. The battlefield was chaos. Humans fought like creatures possessed, laughing as they dodged enemy fire, turning debris into weapons, throwing themselves into battle with a ferocity that should have been impossible. Their weapons ran out of ammunition, so they took enemy guns. Their vehicles were destroyed, so they hijacked enemy tanks. They fought not with strategy, but with sheer madness. The Dominion's high commander, watching from the last fortress, could only stare in horror. This was not war. This was annihilation. His species had built an empire on fear, believing that no force in the universe could ever challenge their might. But these humans had shattered that belief, proving that there was something far deadlier than strength determination. The humans did not fight for conquest, for glory, or for dominance. They fought because they refused to lose. They fought because they found purpose in struggle. As the final defenses fell. As the last Exelthar warriors were cut down, the High Commander realized the terrible truth. The war had never been about humans winning. It had only ever been about how long it would take. And now, it was over. Humanity had done the impossible. They had turned the galaxy's greatest nightmare into a memory. They had erased an empire. And as the dust settled, as the last shot was fired, they stood victorious not because they were the strongest, nor the smartest, but because they were something far more terrifying. They were relentless. The war was over, but the galaxy had not yet recovered. The ruins of the Exelthar Dominion, once the greatest threat in the known universe, now floated in silence. Their homeworld lay in ashes, their armies crushed, their fleets reduced to drifting wreckage. And in the aftermath, as the surviving civilizations gathered to rebuild, one question remained, the question that haunted every council, every leader, every species that had watched in horror and awe as the impossible had happened. What would humanity do now? For centuries, the galactic powers had fought wars, drawn borders, and played politics to maintain a fragile balance. The Exelthar had shattered that balance, and in response, the humans had shattered the Exelthar. But unlike conquerors of the past, humanity did not take the throne of a fallen empire. They did not demand tribute or carve out territories for themselves. They did not impose their rule or force their way of life upon others. Instead, they simply left. It made no sense. No species in history had ever fought so fiercely, endured so much, only to walk away from the power they had earned. The Union leaders, once terrified of what humanity might do, now found themselves in a different kind of fear, the fear of the unknown. What kind of species would wage a war with such madness, such relentless brutality, only to disappear into the void as if it had never happened? The truth, however, was far more complicated. Humanity had never fought for power. They had fought because they had no choice. When the war had begun, they had not been the strongest, nor the most advanced. They had not even been considered an important force in the galaxy. But they had one thing no other species truly understood: the refusal to surrender, no matter the cost. That was the secret to their victory. It was not their technology, not their tactics, not even their soldiers. It was their will. The sheer, unbreakable, terrifying force of will that had driven them forward when logic said they should have fallen. And now, with the enemy defeated, that same will push them forward once more. But this time, it was not toward war. It was toward something far greater. In the ruins of battlefields, human engineers worked alongside alien builders, reconstructing worlds that had been lost to war. On devastated planets, human doctors treated the wounded, not just their own, but everyone. Soldiers who had once stormed enemy strongholds now stood guard over refugee camps, ensuring that no one else would be left defenseless again. And when the Union offered them a seat among the ruling powers, humanity simply declined. They had no interest in ruling, in controlling, in dictating the future of the galaxy. They had fought not for dominance, but for survival. And now that they had ensured it, they left the rest of the galaxy to decide its own fate. But their presence could not be ignored. Their legacy was written in fire and blood, in battles that had redefined warfare, in victories that had shattered empires. They were no longer an unknown species, no longer a footnote in galactic history. They had become something far greater. They had become a legend. The other species spoke of them in hushed voices, uncertain whether to fear them or admire them. Some saw them as heroes, saviors who had risen when the galaxy had needed them most. Others saw them as something more dangerous, an unpredictable force that could not be controlled or reasoned with. They had proven that they were willing to go further, fight harder, endure more than anyone else. And that knowledge alone was enough to change everything. Even among humans, there were disagreements. Some believed they should take their place among the ruling powers, guide the future, ensure that another threat like the Exelthar could never rise again. Others believed they had done enough, that they had given too much already. And so, humanity did what they always did: they diverged. Some stayed behind, working with the Union, helping to rebuild. Others returned to their homeworlds, weary but victorious, ready to leave war behind. And then there were those who ventured further than ever before, pushing the boundaries of exploration, seeking new challenges, new frontiers, because that was simply what humanity did. They did not seek peace, nor did they seek war. They sought purpose. And so, long after the last battlefield had gone silent, long after the last Excelthor fortress had crumbled into dust, the legend of humanity remained. Their enemies had feared them. Their allies had depended on them. The galaxy had been forever changed by them, not because they had conquered, not because they had ruled, but because they had endured.